leading Britain's conversation with Nigel Farage.
So this week's been the third big round of Brexit negotiations taking place in Brussels, and today, Thursday, at the end of 4 days of it, there was a press conference. And of course, Michel Barnier and David Davis were up there on the platform, as we've seen before. But something was very, very different today. Let's have a listen to what was said. We're having problems. We're having technical problems. Oh dear, never mind. Well, I tell you what, without listening to what they had to say, I sat and watched all of this today, albeit from London, not Brussels, and I thought there was a little bit of a change. To date, the observation I've made is that it has been the EU setting the pace, dictating the terms. The EU saying jump! And the British government, too often in my view, asking how high, doing so, and then being asked for more. Struck me that today, perhaps the boot was on the other foot. And due to the miracles of modern science, we now have those clips ready.
Our discussions this week have exposed yet again that the UK's approach is substantially more flexible and pragmatic than that of the EU, as it avoids unnecessary disruption for businesses and consumers. We propose pragmatic solutions to prevent this disruption, and we urge the EU to be more imaginative and flexible in their approach.
Time is pressing if we want to get what we want, which is a global agreement. At the current state of progress, we're quite far from being able to say that sufficient progress has taken place. Sufficient enough for me to be able to recommend to the European Council that it engages in discussions on the future relationship between the UK and the EU.
Well, my observation of all of that today was that Barnier, the normally very suave, sophisticated Monsieur Barnier, was actually pretty tetchy. I almost got the feeling at times that he was perhaps boxed in by the negotiating position that he's been given by, the European Commission itself. And Davis, in a way, did land a little bit of a blow, because he said that the European Union needed to be more imaginative and more flexible in its approach. And I kind of thought that Barnier looked at that and thought rationally, do you know what, Davis is probably right. So it's the first time I've sensed a change, perhaps of tone, in these negotiations, that suddenly Davis really, to me, and all right, I'm a Brexiteer, but Davis, to me, not just looking like the good guy, but looking like the better negotiator in many, many ways. But I wonder, with Davis saying there'd been some concrete progress, there was further to go, but Barnier saying the two sides were quite far away. I wonder at times whether Barnier really wants a deal, or whether a good deal and a positive handshake actually sends a message to other Eurosceptic countries that it's okay to leave, and perhaps that's what they want to avoid. So do you think there is an issue of a lack of trust on both sides? How do we overcome this? Who do you believe? From today's negotiation, who do you think is winning this renegotiation? Is the British government, despite all the previous backtracking and promises of derogation, is the British government now beginning to make progress? Or does the EU still have the upper hand? Or did Barnier's display today show that it's the EU themselves that are suddenly in a little bit of trouble? And Harry on Twitter says to me, I don't believe Barnier or Davis. It's all delaying tactics. We should only pay the EU the amount owed for the time left and no more. Well, this was, Harry, a major issue today. And by the way, you can all engage in this. Should we pay a huge exit bill before we discuss trade, as Monsieur Barnier wants, or is it wholly unreasonable? Let me know what you think. You can call me on 0345 60 60 973. That part, Harry, today was fascinating, because David Davis said, look, they want a whopping sum of money from us, but they can't actually tell us what it is. They can't tell us what the legal basis is. Now, very interesting, a British civil servant, and we don't know his name, at some point this week, before the European Commission's negotiating team, apparently totally deconstructed the argument that we would owe them a vast sum of money. and he did it in legal terms. He probably did it in moral terms too. And I felt right from the start, the idea that we should effectively be held to ransom by Monsieur Barnier, whether it's 50 billion euros or 100 billion euros, was frankly nonsense. Perhaps we're making some progress. I don't know. What does Charles in Birmingham think? Charles, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nigel. I believe Davis is doing the correct thing, and he's correct in doing what he's saying and doing what is positive. Mr. Barnier, I don't believe a word he says at all. I never believed he never would. As far as I'm concerned, he undermined the talks when he allowed the three other leaders come and talking to him and giving them further to have a go at our government. So therefore, Mr. Barnier should stand down with immediate effect, and we should have an independent negotiator for the EU from a different country. And Davis and Theresa May must say to Barnier, you go, we don't want to deal with you anymore.
Well, the trouble, Charles, with that is the current setup is that it appears that the 27 other member states are happy with Barnier being there. So that's a little bit difficult. But I do understand what you're saying, Charles, because both Barnier and Juncker have undermined these negotiations by, frankly, in my view, not playing with a straight bat. Why do I say that? We were told at the start of all of this that we couldn't negotiate with individual member states. We had to negotiate with the EU as a whole. And we kind of took it as a point of honour that same principle would apply the other way round. And blow me down, what do we see? We see Nicola Sturgeon, we see Carwyn Jones, and we see Jeremy Corbyn being welcomed and lauded in Brussels, you know, by Juncker and Barnier. A policy of divide and rule. So, Charles, I do take your point. And by the way, Charles, I don't know whether you saw this, and I'd love to get your reaction to this. But as David Davis's negotiating team were doing battle with Monsieur Barnier's team, and they were about to go and do that press conference together, something else happened in Brussels. Chap turned up there called Tony Blair. And who did he meet but Commission President Juncker, who gave Blair a great big kiss. And I think, you know, frankly, Charles, my feeling is not only should Barnier go, I mean, I don't disagree with that point, although I doubt it's going to happen, but frankly, Charles, I don't think that the EU negotiators are playing fairly with us at all.
Well, if that's the case, then what our government's got to do now, with immediate effect from Monday morning or September when they go back, is say, that's it, no more talks, we're securing the rights of us, we're securing the rights of them, no money, goodbye, forget the trade, we'll sort it out when you decide to play a straight bat, go now. Because Blair shouldn't be in this. Blair should be out of the picture. He's got no rights doing this. And the European Commission should not be allowing Blair to come near him.
It's incredible, isn't it? As I say, Mr. Juncker, Commission President, there he is, giving Tony Blair a great big kiss. The kiss of death for democracy of the nation-state is what I would have thought it probably was. But yes. So, Charles, you've really had enough of all of this, yeah?
Yes, and as for the bill, now, correct me if I'm wrong here, they say they owe us £34 billion, which we'll get back in instalments. Well, if that's the case, take the £34 billion off our bill then. There we go. Well, £34 billion for you.
Well, Barnier today, in that press conference, talked about Britain's obligations after we leave the European Union. And I nearly threw something hard at the television. We have no obligations to them after we've left the European Union whatsoever. And Article 50 states that very, very clearly indeed. And Charles, what I've said, I think is the utterly reasonable position that we were part of spending round commitments to the middle of 2020. We should honour that and not a penny piece more. Charles, I thank you. And I go to Richard in Stratford-upon-Avon. Richard, you're a Remainer, I understand.
I am indeed, Nigel.
Right.
I have to say it's a pleasure to finally be able to talk to you.
Well, it's a pleasure for you to come on. Have you been trying for a long time?
Yes, for some time now, and it's always a pleasure to hear you on the radio, a little bit like listening to a comedy show.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment, even if it wasn't intended that way. Now, Richard, as a Remainer, you know, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a good, fair deal, or what do you want to see?
I do accept entirely the vote of the British people. We need to say that in a democratic process, it has been voted, and if we want to leave, we want to leave. I don't understand all of the drama of all of the Brexiteers around getting a good deal, getting into the customs union, getting the best relationship possible with Europe. That's nothing of what was voted. So if the Brexiteers voted to leave Europe, leave the European Union, leave the ECG, leave the single market, let's leave it. So why all of this drama around, we want the best deal? It's not like we're dropping 60% of the British market. It's not like we're turning our back to our most closest and best allies in the world. No, we want to be independent, so let's be independent.
Well, you know, Richard, I think what we ought to do is get you down to Westminster and get you to have lunch with Vince Cable and with Nick Clegg and with Anna Soubry and perhaps Lord Heseltine. We'll get you to the House of Lords and you can talk some sense into them, because actually it isn't really the Eurosceptics that are kicking up a fuss. It's the Remainers that are kicking up a fuss. And
not exactly.
Well, they are, Richard, because unlike you, you've been clear, you voted the way you did, but you accept the democratic result, so let's get on and make the best of it. And I completely respect that position. But there are so many.
Do, because if you allow me,
go on.
We do need to get the lesson out of us that without the European Union, Little Britain will be reduced to its dimension. We'll be able to get free trade deals with the rest of the world on the rest of the world conditions. We won't be allowed to settle any conditions except if we use our force of extra guns or extra naval power or extra fighting.
No, but that's a separate argument, Richard. And actually, when it comes to trade, what is really interesting is that little countries like Switzerland and Chile and South Korea and indeed Singapore have individually, those four countries have managed to negotiate more free trade deals across the UK than the EU in its entirety. Richard, I thank you for your point of view. I'm Nigel Farage, standing in for Ian Dale at Drive on LBC. It's 5:15. An intransigent and somewhat tetchy Michel Barnier today, in that press conference in Brussels, didn't look to me like a man that really wanted a good deal to happen with the United Kingdom, was keen to put obstacles in the way. David Davis, by contrast, was actually beginning to dictate the terms back to Brussels and say, come on, guys, be more imaginative, be more flexible. I've no doubt that today, in this third round, or the end of the third round of negotiations, that actually Davis had the better of that press conference. Now, I said to you at the top of the show and since that I would talk a little bit about my future or otherwise with LBC. And I've been with this station continuously since the first week of this year. Prior to that, I'd sort of infilled, odd-jobbed on a few shows when people were away, indeed as I'm doing at the moment, with Ian Dale being away. But I have been doing, Monday to Thursday, the Nigel Farage show from 7 till 8 every evening. It would appear, and I'm surprised, and perhaps many of you equally will be surprised, but apparently LBC seem to think it's going all right. So I'm not only going to continue doing the show from 7 till 8 in the evening, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, but I will also be taking on a new challenge and a new show, which will be a current affairs, politics, roundup show, look ahead show for the whole week. And I'll be doing that on Sunday mornings from 10 until 12. Every Sunday, me, Nigel Farage, here on LBC, Sunday mornings, 10 till 12, starting this Sunday, the 3rd of September. So that's my news. I'll be doing more with LBC, and I'm pleased and I'm excited about it, because it genuinely is. It really is a place that not only leads Britain conversation, but it allows all points of view to be put in the middle. And I honestly think that if you listen to a really good LBC show, you've probably got a lot more idea about what the country as a whole, what the middle of the country is thinking about issues than you would get from the other broadcast media, who don't tend to interact with the ordinary public, who genuinely give you their own metropolitan elite view of the world, unchallenged by anybody else. And that simply doesn't and can't happen here on LBC. Now, we were hearing about the incident at the Oval Cricket Ground where there has been, unfortunately, players been stopped with an arrow going on the field, and we're lining up an eyewitness from the crowd to speak to you. But before we go there, I'm going to go to Stephen Maidstone and ask him about this negotiation. Steve, do you get the impression today that Monsieur Barnier actually wants to have a deal with us, or wants to try and punish us?
No, I think ultimately they do want a deal. They know it's in their interest to have a deal, but I think at the moment they're just playing a game. They're not at all interested, that they just want everybody to believe that it's going to be so difficult. In the meantime, the pound drops a bit more, Project Fear continues, and they're hoping that more and more people change their mind.
Well, one thing for certain, Steve, is that Project Fear continues apace. I was watching Sky News last night, talking about the Prime Minister's visit to Japan and how worried the Japanese were about Brexit. Well, hang on a second. With Brexit, we could have a free trade deal with Japan that would allow the Japanese to get motor cars made in their country, sold in the UK market without a 10% tariff. And what we're hearing, Steve, I'm afraid every week from the big corporate businesses and elements of big politics, we're getting constant negativity about Brexit. And what gets my goat, Steve, is we're hearing it from the very same people that supported us joining the exchange rate mechanism 25 years ago and wanted us to join the euro. So, yeah, there is a constant dart of negativity. But against that, Steve, if you were in David Davis's position, what would you do? Would you continue to play the nice guy, or does a point come where you simply have to walk out?
I think at the moment we have to posture the same as they are at the moment. We have to be the nice guy. We have to get the public opinion on our side, but kind of use it to show how difficult they're being, how impossible they're being. If you take things like the border in Northern Ireland, I don't understand how you can negotiate a solution in Northern Ireland while you don't know where we will be in terms of trade at all.
Well, quite. And you know what, Steve? The only real problem, the only barrier to frictionless travel over that border between Northern Ireland and the Republic is Monsieur Barnier himself. Because if he said, do you know what? We're going to have tariff-free business continue because it's in our interests, and it's certainly in Ireland's interests, where with 1.2 billion euros worth of trade every single week between the Republic and the UK, the balance of which is in their favour, 10% of jobs in Ireland, actually linked to exports to the UK, we should have a simple free trade deal. So, Steve, again, it's Barnier putting up the obstacles and actually not the British government. Steve, I thank you for your call. Now, I mentioned to you that Surrey's County Championship game against Middlesex at the Oval in South London was suspended in extraordinary circumstances at around about 4:25 as a metal arrow allegedly was fired onto the field of play, landing near players and umpires. And the Met Police have said in a statement that officers are on the scene. The ground is in the process of a controlled evacuation. There are no reported injuries at this stage. It is believed that the object may have come from outside the ground. There have been no arrests. We retain an open mind as to motive. Inquiries continue. Let's cross live to the Oval and speak to Martin, who is there at the game. Martin, you were watching the game as a spectator. What happened?
Hello, Nigel. Yes,
hello.
I was. The game was probably meandering to a draw. It was the first ball of the over. I think it was hit for 4. And then suddenly the players came together and started walking off the pitch. Most spectators looked at each other, assuming that there'd been a declaration.
Yeah, sure.
But it did seem odd, because usually at this juncture you'll have the ground staff coming on to prepare the wicket for the next innings, and there was nothing. And then you could see the umpires talking to security staff, and they were handing over what was clearly an arrow. It looked like a short, one of these crossbow things.
Did it, Martin? Did it land on the outfield or near to the centre of play?
I think it landed fairly near the centre of play, because I think it was the batsman who actually brought it to the umpire's attention.
Wow!
It's quite a bizarre scene. And once after a few minutes of confusion, there was an announcement from the over the PA explaining that they believe that a projectile had been fired from outside the ground, and advising everybody to take cover, which was greeted with rather a lot of amusement. But it soon became clear that the authorities here were taking it very seriously, and within minutes, the inside of the ground was completely empty.
Goodness me.
Yeah, just a few pigeons flying around on a glorious. I mean, it's very ironic. After yesterday's play was rained off
because it rained hard, didn't it? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
well, at least the pigeons would have kept Henry Blofeld pleased if he'd been commentating, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
And Martin, how many years have you been to the Oval watching cricket?
Well, funnily enough, this is the first time I've been here for about 20 years.
Is it?
I'm a Middlesex supporter.
Right. So
yeah.
it has play. I mean, it's 5:30, and it's the last day of this game. Is that it? Has play finished for the day?
Yes, it's been abandoned as a draw, and I mean, basically, there's still quite a few people here, but they're all in the pavilion.
Yes.
And unfortunately, I'd left my rucksack out in the seating area. And when I tried to retrieve it, I was told very quickly to get back inside. And a steward got it for me. But I'm looking out of the window at the main entrance to the Oval, and there are at least 30 police officers here.
Wow. Well, there are worse places to be holed up than in the pavilion at the Oval, Martin. But
the bar is doing very well.
I'm sure it is. No, Martin, thank you very much indeed. Well, an eyewitness account there and a laugh at the end. But wow, that's pretty scary, isn't it? A metal arrow being fired and landing somewhere near the batsman, from what our eyewitness said, and being fired from outside the ground. That is not good news at all. Now, we were talking and debating, and we'll come back in a minute to those negotiations that took place in Brussels today. And I have to say, I thought Michel Barnier was tetchy. I thought he was intransigent. I thought he honestly gave the appearance of a man who didn't really want to have a deal. And David Davis, by contrast, was doing his best in very difficult circumstances to be positive. And I've been very critical of the government's position over the course of the last couple of months, with transitional arrangements and backtracking in every way. But today, I almost felt sorry for them. I almost felt on their side. I really did. I'm Nigel Farage on LBC. It's 5:30, and well, we're discussing what went on today in Brussels, with Monsieur Barnier looking rather tetchy and Mr. Davis doing his utmost to try and move these talks on. And I'm asking you, which side do you trust? Which of these people are really doing the best to come to a proper deal? But before we go back to that, I'm going to go to Ben Kumar from 7 Investment Management. Ben, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Nigel.
And a new initiative, I believe, from John Lewis.
Yes, John Lewis, obviously selling homeware for quite some time. Your big electrical appliances are now starting something called Home Solutions, where you buy your, let's say, washing machine from them, and they'll also offer you a handyman or tradesperson to come and fit it for you, and offer you a 1-year John Lewis guarantee.
Well, you know what? I mean, I'm sure, Ben, that most people listening to this are really, really good when it comes to getting out a screwdriver and putting together flat pack furniture and all the rest of it. But there are some people, Ben, like me, who are completely and utterly useless at the idea that I could go to a store and buy something and then get someone to come around and fit it. It's going to be a winner, isn't it?
I think it is, and you know, John Lewis has such a good name for service that I think they're really onto something. If you want to compete with someone like Amazon or AO.com, who you can order fridges and freezers and stuff from, what you really want is to go to someone you trust, say, okay, I want to buy this, and I need someone to come round, I'm exactly the same as you, and basically install it for me. And you know what? For some people, that is going to be a winner.
That sounds like quite a major high street fight back against the big distributors to me, I must say. And Vodafone, in what is an increasingly tough, I think, mobile phone market, going for that youth vote again.
Yes, so Vodafone have 19 million customers in the UK, which is pretty staggering, really. They're launching something called Voxy, which is aimed at people under 25. It gives them basically unlimited data access to certain social media sites and some of their messaging apps, and basically nothing else. Vodafone's trying to build a brand, to be honest with you. They did a survey, and it came out that Vodafone doesn't really stand for anything in people's minds other than bad customer service. So, you know, if you're a big brand, you probably want to change that.
Yeah, I mean, they're aiming all of this at young customers. Do young customers actually use mobile phones as telephones at all anymore?
To be honest with you, most of the data says no. I think the idea of calling someone is increasingly going out of fashion. Or, if you do it, you know what? You Skype, you use FaceTime, you do it over WhatsApp. The idea of an old-fashioned phone network that really needs wires or even satellites to provide signal is becoming a bit redundant.
The world is changing, my goodness me. And Ben, how did the markets end today? Any reaction to what happened in Brussels today?
No, not particularly, I have to say. The FTSE was about 1% higher at 7,430, in line with most markets around the world. Pound a little weaker against the dollar at 129, and flat against the euro at 108.5.
And gold still up over 1,300?
Gold is over 1,300, the best. It's on a 9-month winning streak now at that kind of high. So still holding up there, suggesting people are a bit worried about geopolitical risk still.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Ben, thank you very much indeed. That was Ben Kumar from 7 Investment Management.
This is LBC with Nigel Farage.
So, do we trust Monsieur Barnier? Is he trying to reach a decent deal with the United Kingdom? Is he being a dog in a manger, attempting to make sure we can't, whether he personally wants it or not, but that's what he's mandated to do, that we can't get a sensible deal out of all of this, because they know that if that happens, the Danes, and goodness knows who else would leave within the next few months. Mark from Bexhill in Sussex, what was your impression of what you saw today?
I was disgusted, quite honestly, Nigel.
Right.
We're so pusillanimous, and I feel disappointed in David Davis. I know we have to negotiate, we have to appear to be diplomatic, but there comes a point when we've been insulted constantly for weeks now, when we really ought to stand up and say enough is enough. If you don't want to negotiate, go away and come back when you're willing to talk sensibly.
Well, Mark, I do understand that completely, and, you know, I'm hardly one that wants to be a softie on all of this, but I thought there was something slightly different today, and that was that David Davis did say to Barnier and the others that they needed to be more imaginative and flexible in their approach. And I thought, Mark, maybe, just maybe, there was a slight change in atmosphere in terms of who was top dog in that room.
You're right. I think he's stiffening his resolve a bit. But, you see, I don't believe that dear Mrs May ever had any intention of pursuing genuine Brexit policies. I really don't. And I think with the constant barrage of pro-EU propaganda from the BBC and the media, it's all designed, as I think you'd probably agree, to erode our resolve, those of us who voted to leave.
Yes.
For example, names like Michel Barnier and what's his name, Juncker, are drip-fed to us to such an extent that I think more people recognise their names than they do of most members of the cabinet. And it's reaching a level where I suspect they'll achieve their aim, because most people will take the view, well, you know, we can't fight against this. It's an uphill battle. They're sabotaging the whole thing.
I'm not sure, Mark. I'm not sure, Mark. You know, I've been involved in this game for a long time, as you know, and I've been in the European Parliament since 1999, and I've been involved in referendums all over Europe over the course of the last 18 years. And I saw when the Irish voted no twice in referendums on treaties, you know, and I saw them have to vote again, just as I saw the Danes.
Despicable.
Yeah, oh, absolutely despicable. And of course, we saw this with the Danes going all the way back to the Maastricht Treaty. But what they were able to do in Ireland, through the constant drip, 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 as you quite rightly, as you say, through the media, is to wear the Irish people down and to massively outspend those that wanted to maintain their resistance. And the Irish resolve broke on those two occasions. I think there's something different, Mark, happening here, and it's this. Much as we've seen the Labour Party this week and many in Parliament who, frankly, a year on, can't wait to delay, derogate, or even stop the Brexit process. Amongst the British people, despite this diet of negativity, we're now seeing about 70% of British people who voted Remain but think it's right and democratic that we get on with the Brexit process. And we've had one of those callers already today. We had two of those callers yesterday. There's a significant chunk of the population who were Remainers who now think Brexit's the right thing to do. So, Mark, I would say to you, Mark of Bexhill, right. Don't get too depressed down there on the south coast. It's going to be okay. But where I do really agree with you, totally agree with you, is there comes a point where if they continue to behave as badly as they are, by trying to dictate what we should do with our neighbours in Ireland, by demanding outrageous bills that they call divorce bills. There does come a point, Mark, where David Davis will have to keep the respect of many of us to get up and walk out of the room.
I think you're right, and I was invoking the spirit of Cromwell when I was talking to your researcher.
Yes.
And I know it probably seems outlandish, but I have so little faith in this disreputable bunch we have in Parliament. I think, the biggest betrayal of democracy since the Rump Parliament, we need a Cromwell to go in and kick the whole lot of them out. I don't trust any of them.
I'll make one prediction, Mark, in line with your Cromwell analogy, and it's this. If we do not get the Brexit that we voted for and that we want, and that's a majority of us that did that, despite the whole world telling us we shouldn't do so. If we don't get it, then I think Brexit will prove historically to have been the first rebellion and not the last massive rebellion of the British people against the establishment. So if Brexit goes badly, you never know, Mark. Something very big may happen. I think thank you very much indeed for your call. Bill from Ashford in Kent. Did David Davis do the right thing today, or should he be tougher?
Hello, Nigel. Great to speak to you, mate.
Hello there.
I agree entirely with what you were saying, your synopsis of the day.
Yep.
We know that Barnier is in a little box. He's been stuck in a box by the EU saying, go and get as much money as you can. And he can't actually get out of that box.
Yep.
And I think David Davis has now stuck a stick into that box. And the one thing he should do now is turn around Barnier's love of the word "the clock is ticking" and start saying, yes, the clock is ticking. It's ticking on the German car manufacturers.
Oh, Bill.
It's ticking on the French farmers.
Well, wonderful.
On the Italian wine producers. So on and so forth.
Music to my ears.
What Barnier did, and I agree with one of your previous callers, all that business about getting from up north over there and all the rest of them to try and get their position, he should never have done that. That's completely outrageous.
Yeah.
And our response to that would have been, he's in a box, he can't get out of it, keep poking him with a stick, and that's going to work really, really well, and then start spouting out to everybody else, saying, look what you're going to lose if you don't get him out of this box. They've got to get him out of the box. He can't get out of it on his own.
Bill, what you're saying is very interesting because of this. I think that when you read, over the course of the next 3 or 4 days, big newspaper analysis of what took place this week with the third round of negotiations, but in particular in that public showcase today, I think you're going to see a lot of Brussels insiders who say one of the reasons for Barnier's total discomfort is that he's been put into a position to make a series of demands that he now can't achieve. As you said, they've said, go on, Barnier, there's a good bloke, go and get us 100 billion. And Barnier's beginning to realise that it simply isn't going to happen. So, no, Bill, I think you're on the money. And I do also really think that one of the things this government ought to do is a big outreach campaign across the whole of Europe, going to Bavaria and speaking to the German car industry, going to, whether it's Bordeaux or Beaune or wherever it may be, and speaking to the French wine producers and so on and so forth, and making the point that actually simple free trade agreements rather than membership of political union is in their interests even more than ours. Bill, do you feel optimistic about the whole process or not?
I mean, I'm a great Brexiteer. I think it's going to happen. I don't agree with the other chat about Theresa May. I actually think she is going for it. I think she was very quiet in the, in the run-up to the vote. She's made a complete lash-up of the election. We know that. That was she was going to win. So she just said, here's all the horrible things I want to get out of the bag, and I'm still going to win 100 seats. Well, that didn't work for her. I do actually think she's working very hard. Jacob Rees-Mogg is the man. I've just watched him on telly again.
He was being interviewed in his garden, wasn't he?
Yes.
In a village with a name that would have appeared in a Miss Marple, Agatha Christie type novel. Bill, listen, I've got to go, man. I thank you very much for your call. An interesting thought. Bill there pointing out that actually Barnier is himself being boxed in. I'm Nigel Farage here on LBC. It's 5:45. The third round of big negotiations in Brussels on Britain leaving the EU have finished today with a press conference with Michel Barnier and David Davis. Barnier looking tetchy, unhappy. 1 or 2 wonderful photographs of a laughing Davis and a very stern-looking Barnier. Is it boxed in Barnier? Has he been given a very rigid set of instructions from the European Commission that he simply can't achieve? And in turn, David Davis saying to the European Union that they need to be more imaginative and more flexible. But if it continues on this basis, does the moment come when actually what it will need is for the Brexit Secretary to summon up the courage and simply walk out of the room? Or would that be a terrible mistake in terms of our national interest? Let me know what you think on 0345 60 60 973. And I'm going to ask Anne in Burgess Hill what she thinks we should pay the EU to leave. Anne, hello.
Hello to you, Nigel. Of course, I'm just a novice at this, but I'm just concerned that there's a big bill because we have voted to leave. We're expected to pay. And I thought about it, and I thought about when the banks went under.
Yeah.
I thought about when a lot of our companies closed. And the people in those companies, they lost their pensions. The biggest bill, a part of the bill appears to me to be the pension bill for people like Mandelson and, all of those. There's a huge bill on pensions. Well, if we decided to leave, we don't pay that anymore. They have to cut back their pensions. They have to do what a lot of the public have had to do here. Suddenly discover the pensions they worked for aren't realistic and they're not going to get them.
Well, Anne, let's look at it like this, OK? Under Article 50 of this Lisbon Treaty, the one we were never given a vote on, but that's another story. Under Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, it says that at the end of the process, there are no further obligations for the withdrawing state, something that Monsieur Barnier appeared to contradict today. I think we do have some obligations, Anne, that go beyond that, because under the 7-year spending round, this current one that we were a part of and supported doesn't end until 2020. So I think we have some obligations that go on. Beyond that, I cannot see we have any legal obligations, but we maybe have one moral obligation, and that moral obligation, Anne, may well be pensions. Now, what we should do, Anne, rather than giving a sum of money for that, why don't the British government simply take all those British citizens who are on EU pensions and put them on the UK books, just to make the whole thing as clean as it possibly can be?
Well, there's a lot of logic to that, which I leave to all the experts, Nigel. But there is another strand that is concerning me about this. I think a lot of what is going on in the EU is quite alarming. I mean, look at the situation with Greece, with the migrants. Some countries are really going through a tough time, and all this is focusing on something quite, distraction from some of the big issues that have to be dealt with. A novice as I am, it does worry me. We have voted to leave, rightly or wrongly, but that's what the British public have agreed. We've got to make it work. Wouldn't it be good if we can't have mediators in other big issues? We've got to make this work between Europe and the UK.
Well, logic, Anne, logic says that it will work. Logic says it's no problem. Logic says it's easy. And why? Well, because, we're the people going to the table at this stage, trying to be as reasonable as we possibly can be, looking for compromise, looking for a package and a deal. And they're the ones who are saying, oh, no. We won't talk to you about trade or anything else until you meet a whole series of demands that we're making, some of which, incidentally, I think, and I'm sure David Davis thinks, are frankly outrageous. So I get the feeling, Anne, that it should be easy because economic logic says they sell us an awful lot more than we sell them. My feeling, Anne, is it's difficult because they fear that if the UK is seen to have left easily and comfortably, many other countries would want to leave too. So
Nigel, you're right. Can I just throw this in?
Yeah.
Two things. I, like many people, absolutely shattered as a young mother when I saw New Zealand, Australia, Canada, all our close Commonwealth countries pushed to the back of the queue.
Yeah.
They weren't important anymore. We owed them something, I think. And the other strand is, you mentioned earlier to someone else about what's happening with the government, and I thought, Churchill was a great leader, but, he got things wrong sometimes. But he got on with it.
Well, we all do.
And he bounced back.
Yeah, well, all of us at any level in life, Anne, if we do things, we get some things wrong. Of course we do. But hopefully, the most important thing is we get the big things right. And your broader historical point about how you felt years ago when we voted to stay in the common market, yeah, there are lots of little white crosses, you know, or tablets of stone across northern France and elsewhere in the world that come from Australia, Canada, India, the West Indies and other parts of the world that say to me, Anne, that we ought to recognise who our true friends in the world are, whilst at the same time being friendly with our European neighbours. That's what I think, and I think you rather agree. And I thank you. Ian from Watford, you are going to be my last caller on this subject. How did it look to you today?
Well, it looked like it's as I've expected it to do. I voted Brexit, mostly because I would love to see a change in the EU, not an actual complete demise of it, but the chances of ever it changing would not in the interest of those people who run it. And I see that Barnier is there fighting for his job, and all those boys there, their cushy number, that he knows that one thing that has to happen here, from what I understand, is that whatever deal they come up with, it has to go to Parliament. And his plan, from what I could see, would be that he has to make that deal the worst possible deal under any circumstances, because if they give us a half-good deal, the rest of Europe will just say, well, they're already not happy with the EU. They'll say, well, why have we got to pay into this body of people who live in two parliaments and live a luxurious lifestyle for what? We can trade. There's nothing to. You know, the great joke to me is the main function is free trade. Free trade.
Yeah. You mean not one that you have to pay a massive membership bill for, etc., etc., etc. No.
So, but he is fighting, to my mind. He will want to give nothing away because he knows that if he does, his days are numbered.
Well, Ian, I agree with you. And you're quite right. It's not free trade. And you know something? Even if we were to leave and have tariffs put in place, the amount of those tariffs would be less than our net contribution fee to the European Union every single year. Ian, I thank you. I thank all of our callers on that subject. And I think, you know, some degree of agreement there that perhaps the tables had turned a little bit today and the British were beginning to look rather more like the reasonable good guys. Now, after the top of the hour, we're going to talk about the fact that online gambling firm 888 have been asked to pay a record penalty, £7.8 million, after it failed to protect gaming customers, vulnerable people. And there have been 7,000 people who'd chosen to bar themselves from 888 accounts, but the accounts weren't actually closed. So there is a problem here. One punter lost £1.3 million over the course of the last 13 months, including money he'd stolen from his own company. But the real question is, where do you draw the line between personal and corporate responsibility? At what point is it the fault of the pub that people drink too much, or the gaming house that people gamble too much? Let me know where you think the line should be by calling 0345 60 60 973.